Welcome to MLB This Week podcast. A lot of talk about the DH again in the National League. Pete Rose makes the Hall of Fame, and has replay gone too far in baseball? All this and more on the next edition of MLB This Week. And hello, everyone. Welcome to MLB This Week. I'm not so sure how our intro sounded there. We have our snow edition of MLB This Week as we got a little blizzard over the weekend, Gary.
Yes, we did, Rich, and if my background looks a little different and I'm using a headset, it's because I not venturing out to the studio quite yet because of the 2.5 feet of snow that we've gotten here in Long Island. So just roughing it inside today.
I don't blame you. Yeah, you got a lot more snow than New Jersey did here, but we made it through the blizzard of 2016, one of the historic snowstorms there, and a lot of good news coming out of the baseball world this week, Gary. Plenty of stuff. How about Pete Rose making the Hall of Fame?
Well, that's terrific. Even if it is the Reds Hall of Fame, at least the Reds are bucking the trend a little bit here and putting him in the Hall of Fame, getting him involved, and they're going to retire his number too, which is great for Pete. It's a long time coming, and I'm surprised that they waited so long, Cincinnati, but I guess they wanted to let things kind of cool down, and in a way, it's sort of not an attack, but in your face to the commissioner for turning down his reinstatement to Major League Baseball. So Cincinnati taking that step and say, well, you're not going to reinstate him into baseball and let him into the Hall of Fame, but we're going to put him in our Hall of Fame and retire his number. So good for Cincinnati, good for Pete Rose. It's a long time coming.
Yes, it is. And of course, Pete Rose represented the Reds last year in the All-Star game, so you kind of had a feeling that something was going to go on with that as far as him being reinstated to the point to allow him to go into the regular Hall of Fame. But as you said, Gary, yeah, Cincinnati welcomed him into the Hall of Fame for the Reds, and there's going to be a 3-game series June 24th through the 26th, 2016, of course, this year. And the Cincinnati Reds will be honoring Pete Rose and the rest of the Big Red Machine during that time. So Pete Rose, he's been through a lot, and I, like you, Gary, I kind of thought the commissioner was going to look at this in a fresh light, especially with the way baseball has embraced some gambling sites known as DraftKings and FanDuel, but there's still a lot of other people on the fence that don't like Pete Rose and don't think he should be back into baseball. But for now, he's a member of the Reds Hall of Fame.
Yes, and that's a great honor in itself. I know the idea is to get into the National Baseball Hall of Fame, but you take what you can get sometime, and it is the Major League Baseball, and as well as National Football League and the NBA are all fooling themselves with this gambling site and trying to convince you. I think the only one really is the NBA, which almost admits that it is a gambling site. But everybody else is got their head in the sand about this and continue to defend it as not being a gambling site. But we all know better. MLB is making lots of money. Their partnership with, I think it's DraftKings, and have a lot on the line with them now. but to me, it's contradictory that you can have this rule that you stick to and you push about gambling, and then to be in bed with a gambling site. Just a little contradictory to me.
So Pete Rose, a couple of days ago at Cincinnati.com, says he hasn't given up hope on Cooperstown, and he says he's not the type to give up on anything, especially when Commissioner Rob Manfred did say that he could possibly someday be admitted into the Hall of Fame, but not uh, an official member of baseball. So we'll have to see where the Pete Rose story goes here in 2016, and some more talk about something that we don't really care for either, Gary, the National League and the DH.
Very, very sad. And Rich, I think we did a story last week about how the St. Louis Cardinals general manager has said that it's gaining momentum to bring the DH to the National League. Now the commissioner came out and said that it's gaining momentum to get it into effect, and they're going to talk about it. And there's a possibility it could be in effect by 2017. It'd be very sad. And I really feel that I don't know where this momentum's coming from. I don't know if it's coming. It must be coming from the owners, because if you look at the fan base, it's overwhelming on social media and every article I read, how fans are, especially National League fans, are dead set against this. And I think if they put this into practice, all right, the fans will get used to it, but they are not going to be happy about this. And I myself am looking into starting a petition to send to Manfred to stop this nonsense. And what they should do is do away with interleague play. It's going to come a day, Rich. I think that it's going to be like it's not going to matter where you are, what conference or anything. They're going to go probably to the top 6 teams, get into the playoffs, and there'll be an East and a West conference, and that'll be it. And what a shame that will be, that we're taking away the whole mystique of the American League and the National League.
Yeah, and even more further, there hasn't been too much talk about this by any National League owner, so I think it's being pushed by Manfred. He's sort of dangling it out there and offering it to a few clubs that it may benefit down the road. The Cubs come to mind, a few other teams come to mind as well, but the interesting part about this was there were several comments saying that nobody was even talking about it at the recent owners' meetings, and they really don't know where it's coming from. But I think we could both agree that it's coming from the commissioner's office.
I think it's coming from St. Louis, the commissioner's office west, and the commissioner's office, and that's it. I don't see where it's coming from anywhere else. Don't forget, they got Matt Holliday, who keeps breaking down, that can't play. Maybe they're looking for a way to stretch this guy out a couple more years, and he could DH. Who knows? Stranger things have happened. Wainwright got hurt, but even Wainwright said he wants to hit. That he could have been hit. He could have got hurt running out a bunt, or he could have got hurt running for a ground ball or covering first base. That's what's going to be the interesting thing now. We're almost getting to a point where if an injury occurs because of something and they think they can fix it, they're going to fix it. What happens if a pitcher gets hurt covering first base? Are they going to say, well, if you throw it to first baseman, and there's no pitcher there, if it beats the batter to the base, if the ball beats the runner, then he'll be out anyway, so you don't have to run. We don't have to make the pitchers run anymore. I don't know. I just think it's an awful rule. It's been nothing. It doesn't even create that much more offense. Very little offense was created from it. And I don't know. I just think it is a drag on the game. It takes away the strategy. Ask any manager that's managed in both leagues, and they all say it is easier in the American League. It is more difficult to manage in the National League than the American League. Doesn't mean you're going to have success if you switch from one to the other, but they all say you have to be more alert. You've got to be innings ahead, much more difficult. That's what we want in the game. We want the strategy. One guy said, and I thought it was a great analogy. I think it was Tom Verducci that said, it's like chess and checkers. The American League plays checkers, and the National League plays chess.
That's for sure. And Joe Torre, MLB's chief baseball officer, said that there really hasn't been any conversation about it within baseball, the ownership, or anything like that. So it's interesting how this rumor gets out that the National League may be interested in a DH when there doesn't appear to be any interest there. A Phillies partial owner said, "We would like to remain real baseball, quote unquote," and that comes from Dave Montgomery, who has been with the Phillies for more than 30 years. So interesting to see where this goes in the next year or so, if there's any more talk about it. I think it's just something that's being pushed by certain people, and it'll probably fade away.
Well, Rich, there is another option. It could be the commissioner's office putting out the feelers to see what people think of it by saying it's gaining momentum, and maybe if there's a big enough backlash by the fans, they'll just say it's not worth the chance to take it, and make it, just leave the status quo, leave it the way it is. Or maybe they should consider that it's time for the DH to go completely and get rid of it in the American League.
Yeah, that's a possibility. We'll have to keep our eye on it for our listeners. And while I'm mentioning that, I would love our listeners to get in touch with us. Just go to our website at MLBThisWeek.com. You can send us an email at talk@MLBThisWeek.com. And you can also send us a voice recording. It's on the bottom of our pages, our show pages there at MLB This Week. If your computer or laptop has a microphone connected to it, you can just push the button, start recording, and send us an audio message. We'd love to bring it up on the program.
And, Rich, we said we were in the middle of a snowstorm, and one of New Jersey's favorite sons is an amateur meteorologist, I hear.
Yeah, it seems like Mike Trout has a hobby of keeping track of the weather. Over the weekend here in southern New Jersey, he actually picked up the phone and called the Weather Channel himself and offered his weather skills to Jim Cantor, who has a good show there on the weatherchannel.com. I don't even get the Weather Channel with my cable network anymore. But Mike Trout called in, gave an account of how much snow he was getting, other things with wind and things like that. And he even shared a lot of those on social media, tweeting out his drive around his hometown and describing how the snow is coming down. So, yeah, Mike Trout, MLB MVP of the American League, and now he's got a secret obsession with weather.
I didn't even know he would be in New Jersey. I figured he'd stay out in California to train, but there he is, home in New Jersey, and out on a Friday night in a blizzard, or the beginnings of a blizzard, and Saturday morning talking to the Weather Channel. That's a great story. I saw that, and I thought, that's hilarious.
Yes, it is. It's one of those things that you don't think about. But, yeah, he was absolutely giddy at describing how much snow had fallen and just really seemed to care about weather forecasting. He even said that he would like to have been a weatherman had he not been a baseball player. So amateur weatherman Mike Trout there calling into the Weather Channel and giving a description of what was going on.
And if he'd like to come back home, we'd love to have him patrol center field and City Field for the New York Mets. We certainly would not turn that trade down. They can have Matt Harvey. We'll give you Matt Harvey for Mr. Trout.
Well, that would be an interesting trade, but you've already signed a center fielder over the past couple days. Apparently, you have that story up.
Well, yes, it was a good weekend for Met fans, and after all the complaining on social media all winter, when you look back and look at the job that the Mets have done to this point, they've actually done a fantastic job. They got their man. They got Yoenis Cespedes has agreed to a deal with the New York Mets. It's 3 years. It's $75 million. However, there is a 1 year opt out, so it's essentially probably going to be a 1 year contract, which is exactly what the Mets were looking for. And what's amazing about this is it's almost as Cespedes came back to the Mets rather the Mets pursuing Cespedes. He had a 5 year deal apparently on the table from the Washington Nationals, which was for, I believe, $100 million, but there was a lot of put off money in that. So he had continued to say how much he wanted to come back to the Mets, come back to New York. And a lot of people gave up hope because the Mets just did not seem interested in re-signing him. And in I have to say, one of the brilliant negotiation jobs that I've seen in quite some time. They waited him out. They took all kinds of options, waiting. The market never developed him for more time, and we're able to make this deal with him for more annual money, but for a shorter period of time with the 1 year opt out. So works out great for the Mets because they get him for this year, and all the fans are happy. Technically, they have him signed for 2 more years after that. If he has a great year and decides to go free agent, they also get, if they make him a qualifying offer, they can get a draft pick. So it really is a win-win for the Mets all the way around with this deal. So if he opts out, they can make him a qualifying offer. If he declines that, which he probably would because he'd get more just by staying, they get a draft pick. So brilliant maneuvering, I feel, by Sandy Alderson in getting this job done. And they addressed a lot of their weak points over the winter. They kept the big bat. They've improved their middle infield, defensively and somewhat offensively. It might be a wash offensively, but got the big bat back. They signed Antonio. I keep saying Banderas, Bastardo, the former Philly, to strengthen. And Jerry Blevins is coming back to strengthen their bullpen. This could be an awesome team, and I think they've catapulted themselves back into the favorite for the NL East and for the NL pennant.
Yeah, I would have to say they're favorites for sure. Just a few days ago, it was announced that Cespedes may be joining the Nationals with a 5-year, $100 million deal, but that seemed to fall apart. And as you said, Gary, maybe it's a good move for both Cespedes and the Mets, given the fact that if he does do well, he can opt out of this contract and maybe go somewhere else at more money. But, you know, for his long term, 5 years at $100 million or 3 for 75, what would you take?
Well, there's a lot of talk about that the $100 million wasn't going to be paid in the 5 years, that it might be stretched out a little bit. So he was. I think part of it was pride in that he wanted to get more annually than Upton and Hayward. And at 25 million here at the Mets, that's what he's going to get. He's going to get more money, and I just feel that it's just probably he wanted to stay here. And everything is cyclical in sports. And at a time where people used to want to go to St. Louis to play, and people didn't want to come to the Mets for whatever reason. Now this year we had a guy break down crying at the trade deadline because he thought he was going to get traded from here. He wanted to stay here. We had Zach Wheeler recovering from Tommy John surgery, actually calling the general manager to ask that he wants to stay here, don't trade him. And now you got Yoenis Cespedes, who comes to the trade and says he wanted to stay here. Don't forget, he also had in his original contract, he had a stipulation that I believe it was 5 days the team would have to negotiate with him after the end of the season. And he waived that when he got here. Now, he had that contract with other teams, didn't waive it. He had it when he waived it here. So I really think there was a strong feeling to stay here, stay with the Mets. He saw that pitching. And, like people said, well, if he would have signed with the Nationals, we would have had to face him. But think of it the other way. If he signed with the Nationals, he'd have to face Harvey, DeGrom, Syndergaard, and Cologne and Matz as just as well. So I don't think he'd rather play behind them than face them. So not a bad deal for him, I don't think. And again, he gets out next year. It's a very weak field next year, free agent wise, for outfielders, and he could be the star of next year's All-Star, the star of next year's free agent class.
Yeah, very interesting career so far for Cespedes. He's a power hitter, but I'm not so sure he's worth that kind of money. Maybe in this market he is. We'll see this year how well he does, and especially his performance in the World Series. That has to be a little concerning. Maybe he was injured. He didn't certainly bat well, and his fielding was not very good either. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of year Cespedes has this year.
Well, it has come out. I don't know. I heard this today. It has come out that he was hurt during the World Series. So whether or not it had anything to do with it, I don't know. But you would have thought that being with Detroit, he would have saw a lot of Kansas City. Maybe that was it too. Maybe their pitchers knew how to get him out. But he did struggle in the postseason. But again, without that those 52 games or whatever it was that he came for, they wouldn't have been in the World Series. They wouldn't have been in the playoffs. He did carry that team for mostly August and halfway through September, and the other thing about it is, even though he struggled and he played bad in the field, the Mets had a lead in most of those, in 4 out of 5 of the World Series games, and what really hurt them was the bullpen. If they had a better bullpen and they could have shut down the Royals, we would have had a World Championship. So let's hope he's healthy, has a great year, and carry us all the way through.
Yep, and the interesting thing with Cespedes is he was on the market for a long time. He did sort of alleviate to the possibility of not going back to New York. I think it was more not going back to the Mets, and then all of a sudden this contract came up, and apparently it is going to be official. We'll have to see what happens. It's a good signing for the Mets. He certainly produces RBIs. And just like Ryan Howard, there was an article about him in the Philadelphia area. where they're going to sit him if he doesn't hit. But if they took a look at how many RBIs and home runs he had last year, even playing quote unquote badly, he still led the team.
Yeah, and that's it, Rich, and it's still a threat. Do you want to? I know, we get nervous even here in New York if we're playing the Phillies and it's a tight game and a tight spot, and Ryan Howard's coming up because he's still got explosive bat. He doesn't hit as well as he used to. He don't move as well as he used to, but he could still hurt you. And it's the same thing with Cespedes, and Cespedes is right in his prime. So you need that threat in the middle of the lineup. They kind of have it with Lucas Duda, but Lucas Duda is so streaky. I know it's hard to say he's streaky with 29 home runs last year, but he's really 28. He's the kind of guy that can hit 18 in a month and not hit one for 2 months. So there's some streakiness there, and at least with that combination from both sides of the plate, a righty in Cespedes, a lefty in Duda, it gives you some real pop. And then they have Granderson hitting some pop, and with some pop, and hopefully they'll get some power out of Conforto out in left field, who probably may not get to be the everyday left fielder quite yet, because with Cespedes, I can see them still playing Cespedes against some lefties out there, and Lagares getting some time in center field, and it's just. I was interviewing somebody 2 weeks ago, and as they said, they think at that time, before Cespedes, that they had a better team than they did going into spring training of last year. They're deeper with more proven players, and I think this makes them that much more deeper.
We'll see as the season starts up in just a few months here in 2016. Gary, the Week in Baseball also produced a article at ESPN.com by senior writer Jim Capel there, and he had an article about over-examining replays, why replay isn't that great for baseball. And it starts off by saying Rob Manfred's 1-year anniversary as commissioner is actually tomorrow on January 25th. And what innovation would the ESPN writers make that would improve the game if the sport started over today? So Mr. Capel had this to say about replay. It's a very good thing in baseball. Technology has advanced so much since the game's rules were first written, but he goes on to say that certain plays where a guy might not be on the bag all the time and is tagged out may not be to the benefit of the baseball replay to get the call right, so to speak. Now, I don't know if I agree with this, because that's the very reason that replay was brought in.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. You don't want to get the call right. I would think the whole idea is if it's going to make the call right, then let it make the call right.
Exactly. He says this became most noticeable during last year's postseason when several runners were called out after replays showed that they had gone off the bag ever so slightly after the tag.
Okay, so they're out. That's
if they're safe or out. He's asking for a cushion, which I don't think can happen with replay.
No.
It's either got to be a yes or a no. Of course, even with replay, we've seen it over the last year that sometimes you can't tell what the correct call is, even from a replay. But for close plays or any sort of what he was talking about, I thought it was a little bit odd to. But I think his more point was over-examining specific plays that took 5 to 10 minutes to come to fruition.
Well, I can agree with that, but again, the whole mandate is to get the call right. So it's going to take some time at times to do that because they want to get the call right. And some of those plays, look, that's up to the player. The player's got to learn. You know, Rich, when we were kids growing up, you used to, we talked about this before. You used to slide into the bag. Now these guys do these pop up things where they come up. That's great. They come up, they can run, but they're all off balance. They slide past bags because I don't know whether they slide late. Um, it's up to the player to learn how to do the proper mechanics, the proper type of slide, so you're not sliding past the bag, and have a chance of being called out. It's not replay's job. Replay's job is if a play occurs to check it out and see if it's right on the field or it's not.
Yeah, and as you said, if a player's foot comes off the bag and he's being tagged, then yeah, he should be out.
He should be out.
You're supposed to have your limb, arm, or leg or something on the bag.
Yeah.
So don't think that that's very a good idea, but that came from Jim Capel, ESPN senior writer in the past week. Interestingly enough, they did have a lot of the other writers that are at ESPN also come up with their imaginations on what would make a better team or better game, actually, with the MLB. Here's a couple of them. Jerry Krasnick said that international expansion teams would make a good offering. Let's see, another one here. Bowden implement the DH in both leagues, which we're definitely against. And Jason Stark would ban the save in favor of a new stat. So if you have to, if you're interested to read about that one, I think I would read about that later myself. Ban the save in favor of a new stat is his idea.
And what would that stat be? I mean, what else?
Well, let's take a look-see at it here. In other words, he's saying ban, quote-unquote, the save. I'm a great fan of relief pitching and great relief pitchers. That's the first thing they ought to know. So scrolling down here, it's absurd enough that it mostly involves a guy getting 3 outs before he can give up 3 runs. But that's not even my number one issue with the save. He goes on to list various things that he has against a closer being brought in, for example, to earn a save on certain strategies, things like that. So he does not like to save.
Well, we don't like the DH, so tell that other guy that he's wrong with his DH in both leagues. They want to make it better. Get rid of the DH in both in the American League and get rid of interleague play, and let's go back to 2 separate leagues completely, and they only meet at the All-Star Game and the World Series. That's the way it should be.
Yep, that's for sure. Well, we'll have to start a petition or something. Well, we're going to do a shortened edition of the show with the snow and all the blizzard that fell upon the Northeast here. But Gary, you have the last story up here. Mookie Betts.
Well, outfielder Mookie Betts had a good year last year. Young guy, 23, and he's landed the impressive honor of being the athlete chosen for the cover of the legendary video game franchise RBI Baseball 16. So Mookie Betts makes the cover, and I don't think there's a cover jinx on for the video games as there is like for Sports Illustrated. So perhaps Mookie will go and have another great year, and he's really an exciting ball player, Rich, and this is quite a nice honor for him at 23 years old. I'm sure Mike Trout's been on it probably a couple of times already because he's an old veteran at 23. But Mookie Betts gets his first cover, and that's pretty cool, for a young guy. That is the video game generation, and I used to like to try to play some of those video games, but you can't get them for the computer anymore, and I don't want to go out and buy an Xbox or one of those things. Who's got $500 to spend on that?
Yeah.
But I used to like to play the sports games and the computer versions. In fact, I still have a couple probably buried away. I don't know if they'll even play on the newer computers, but I used to like the EA Sports one, and I think there was a high heat baseball one. Baseball was always a tough one. Because of the intricacies in it. Madden football was a little bit easier. And but I go back to the old Atari game with the stick figures, and that was always a lot of fun. And in my day, back in the day, that was like high tech, and that was exciting, especially the basketball one. You'd have these two stick figures running to each other's basket and taking a shot, and oh my God, we thought that was look at that, that's incredible. Now the things today, they look like the players and everything else. So.
Sure, and I think it originated with Pong back and forth, if you remember that.
Oh, yeah, I can remember playing that in college when we would line up to put our quarter into this game with this stupid thing going up and down, but that was high tech back then. And then they came out with the Atari Home, and it just so happened that I worked for a company that made the boards, the circuit boards for the Atari game, and for some of the Activision games, which was an outside company that was making games for the Atari game console 2600, and I was able to pick one up relatively cheap, a refurbished model, because every year around the holidays they'd make an offer to those that they refurbished, to us, if we wanted to purchase it, and we could purchase games like at half price at that time. And so I had quite a collection of the Atari games, the skiing game that Activision put out, and they had a helicopter game and stuff, and we would play for hours. And I had a Nintendo 64 for a while, and that was really high tech, because then you had, more cartoonish type of things that came out. And then, of course, the PlayStation and all of that came out. But, man, it's hard to keep up with those things. And maybe when I retire, I'll pick one up and can fill my day playing Madden football and RBI baseball on it.
Yes, it is. And you could even get one of those handheld Pac-Man games for the television.
Yes. You remember the Pac-Man, boy, that was a blast. Play that for hours and hours.
Well, that about wraps up our coverage of MLB This Week. The stories that we think you would be entertained with during the week that was in baseball, and the coming weeks, of course. Gary, a whole lot to talk about coming up as spring training here is just a little less than a month away from starting up here. We'll be talking a lot about Florida, talking a lot about the season, our upcoming predictions, of course. We're probably working on those right now, and it's going to be a fun time.
And I hope we're not talking about any more snow.
Yeah, that could be a great prediction of no more snow for us. We've got our fill for the winter.
Well, at least we have our alternate setups that we can go to and do this show, Rich.
That's for sure. Well, thanks for joining us for this edition of MLB This Week. Check out our website at MLBThisWeek.com. You can follow us on Twitter at MLBThisWeek. Gary's Mets Musings is his podcast. I do a Phillies Talk podcast right there at baseballtalkradio.com. So tune it in, give it a listen, and we appreciate it. We'll talk to you again next show.
See you all next week.